But anyway, if you started out, you had one male from northern Illinois and one male from southern Illinois, and you wrote up a paper. How did the difference between northern Illinois and southern Illinois Paramyscus maniculatus? And you submitted that manuscript to a scientific journal. I don't think you'd get it published, because the fact of the matter is that in order to study the similarities and the differences between the animals of a single species from different places, you have to use statistics. And as soon as you start talking about statistics, you're talking about large sample sizes. Okay? And there are an awful lot of places that Paramyscus maniculatus lives. They are found all the way from up the west coast of Canada, almost to Alaska. I don't think they get into Alaska. They're found all over the United States, portions of southern Canada. They go all the way down into to the bottom of the Mexican plateau, coast to coast. They're all over the place. And people are interested in trying to figure out how they're different from one place to the other, and if they are different, how much so, and what made them different. Like, how can we account for the fact that these over here have bigger ears and are darker colored from these over here? And somebody one of these days may decide actually that what we're calling Paramyscus maniculatus is not all just one species, but in fact, it's 2 or 3 species that are very similar to each other. And this wouldn't have become apparent until you had enough specimens so that when you took the measurements, you got a bimodal curve or something like that, statistics again. So that's why we have so many. And as a matter of fact, you never get enough. Because one of the things you want to know, too, is where they live and where they don't live. And you can get a Peterson Field Guide to the Mammals of North America, and there'll be a map there in the Peterson Field Guide to the Mammals of North America that shows every place where Paramyscus maniculatus lives and every place it doesn't live. And the area will be colored, will be darkened where they live, and the areas they don't live will be white. Well, at one time, when Columbus arrived on these shores, nobody even knew that Paramyscus maniculatus existed, let alone could make a map like that. Something obviously has happened since he arrived, and this book was produced. Well, what's happened is that actual human beings have gone out walking around all over the continent with big bags of traps over their back, setting them everywhere and catching these little mice and stuffing them and sticking them in this collection and all the other collections. And you can see the larvae, which are a little more slender, wormy-like things. And usually there's a lot more larvae than there are adults, but there's a lot of adult beetles in that one. And this is the coyote skeleton they're working on.
Nice. Coyote?
Coyote. And by the way, there was a physician here in town who had a patient who had arthritis and whose entire backbone was solidified into one bone all the way from her neck to her head down to her pelvis. And he wanted to study her skeleton. So her backbone was in her for a while. So in actual fact, we are insatiable for specimens. Okay? We never get enough. And there is an infinite number of questions you can ask these specimens. And we keep coming up with new ones. Mm-hmm. Now we can take the little pieces of those skins and figure out their DNA sequences. Nobody had any idea that you could do that years ago. Oh, by the way they made those maps is every place somebody caught a Paramyscus maniculatus, they put a dot on the map. Every place they didn't put a dot on the map. And pretty soon they got enough dots, they can make those maps. They don't just come into your head. A lot of people had to go out and set a lot of traps to make those maps happen. So now it's been found that many of the species that we thought were all one thing turn out to be several species that we can now tell apart because the DNA tells us they're separate species. Now, once you know they're separate species and you can separate them out on the basis of their DNA and you look at them real hard, then, I see how you can tell them apart just by looking at them. But this would have never been possible. Nobody would have ever been able to do that if they were all mixed together. Once you get them separated out, it's a little easier to do. Okay. So this is like a library. The difference is that every volume in this library is unique and is irreplaceable.
Wow.
It's not like a library of books. Okay. Each specimen is the only individual from that particular place, caught on that particular day, of that particular sex, of that particular age, with that particular number of embryos in it, with those particular measurements that had such and such stomach contents and such a DNA sequence. Madagascar was not settled by people until relatively recently. I don't know, 10,000 years ago maybe, or even more recently.
No, the last one's like New Zealand was like 8,000 years ago.
Okay, well anyway, something like that. And so up until very recently, there were these great, big, humongous, enormous mothering birds in Madagascar that were called elephant birds because they were big, and elephants are big. And they laid the largest egg that we know of, at least, maybe we found some dinosaurs recently that laid bigger eggs, but up until recently, anyway, this was the largest egg known to have been laid by any kind of animal. This is an elephant bird, so this is black, it's not real. Interesting thing is these things sometimes wash up on beaches some distance away from Madagascar. That's an ostrich egg, just to give you an idea of the difference in size. This is a real ostrich egg.